Welcome back to Stellar Horizons campaign gameplay through episode 40. Sorry for the lull in recordings. It's been a busy work week. Let's see here. We are getting ready to start the year 2131, and we've got one quick correction. So we were getting some conflict going last time, and I think all of that went correctly. But Andrew, the designer, thankfully pointed out when the Russian raided the South American base and took damage, need to roll up to 3 times to see if that crewed vehicle flips over and becomes unready. So we're going to take care of that now. So first 36, 75, and 59. So it does not flip, but it still has damage, so it could continue to raid. But that is, well, now that it, I was planning on not raiding. The maximum amount of damage you can take off that raid table is 4, but I can assign it to either CV. They may. I think we might risk it and let them go again. So, are there any other just notes? No, I think we'll go on to the build phase and we'll just discuss things as we go. Starting with the Asians. So here's what they're building. They're going to spend $8 billion on Earth to get some fuel and a little bit of ore. They're going to launch that. Remember, they've got the double cargo capacity. Send that out to the asteroid belt, and they're also going to build an orbiter on Earth. One of the considerations that we had here so they've got 2 combat vehicles and they've got 2 transports. I considered they could have dismantled one of these transport vehicles, decommissioned it to get half rounded up of the resources used to build it. The CV3 would have been sufficient. They are short right now, just with what they've got. They've got 10 ore here. They're short 1 supply and 1 fuel from building the crude vehicle 6. They need 4 and 3, and they've got 3 and 2. So I gave some consideration to that. That would have left them with a combat factor gap between these 2 fleets of like, I think it was 5, and also a deficiency by 2 drones. So they would have been down like about 5 combat points and 2 drones. Breaking out, so the idea was to break out, engage in combat, and the problem is that it would have been, it's reasonable to assume that they might have lost, a crewed vehicle, which would suck from a resource standpoint and also give the Americans a victory point. It's going to be harder for the Asians probably to kill an American crewed vehicle, although they, of course, would love to do that. With that being said, because it's the status is not war, it's embargo, the Asians also have the option of just moving out. When they get intercepted, they can surrender, and what that means is they would lose any resources that they're carrying, but they won't be carrying any, and they get flipped, and they would also have to give up a political marker, which they don't have right now. So for the cost of probably just having all their ships flipped, they can leave. They can also continue just to sit there, but I think the Americans' plan was to project force and kind of lock down Jupiter, and I think that's working. The Asians probably will have a better situation if they fall back, at least. So I think they're going to break out and accept getting flipped, head back to the asteroid belt, and that's what this is about. So they've got I see that I've made a mistake here. I started off, I thought the Asians had a buy supplies, it's sell. I was thinking they could buy supplies and then supplement that. So I'm going to redo this. They've only got the 2 supplies. So they need fuel and supplies to be able to ready all these vehicles. And so we're not going to do the ore now. They do have supplies at the T base though. Quite a few. Maybe we'll go ahead and do that. The question is how they're going to have to send one of those transports over to the T base, which is going to mean another year of waiting, but I think that's preferable, so we'll stick with that. What else? So that's the Asians builds, and that's the plan. They're just going to retreat from Jupiter. The Russians are up next. They are spending, they're going to buy some rockets. They had those 2 LV-4s that lasted forever. Hopefully these rockets will last them a good long while as well. They're spending some money on fuel, which they want to send to Venus so that they can continue to build settlements. And then they're going to spend $5 billion. So they're going to launch the flyby and the probe on the LV-4 to the outer systems. Those 4 resources on the LV-2. The Americans, not sure exactly what they're doing right now. They're got a couple of ideas. We'll talk about that. Anyway, they're building all of this stuff at Jupiter. So an LV-2 and a rover out of the stockpiles that they have there. They're getting low on ore. They've got some ore mining going on. We talked about, I think the Americans are going to try to do this, but they need more supplies. So we're probably going to move these guys over here and mine supplies at Europa this turn. The Americans would like to build a base out here, Oberon. It'll cost them 9 minus 2. Yeah, 7 supplies. They were also thinking they might build in a CV2, build a small supply station. Then they can send the CV2 out to Pluto, try to pick up the crewed vehicle exploration mission. That's worth 5 victory points. I think that's worth doing. It's going to cost them, not an insignificant amount of resources, and then money during the next economic phase if they want to keep this base. I had thought that the Russians might go after that approach, but the Russians are already at 6 bases, which is the max. The Asians, of course, have a free base as well, but they are they're currently kind of tied up with fighting and trying to build terraform Mars. So that's all of the builds. Let's go to the movement phase. Orbiter arrives. These guys arrive. I was struggling because it's been a little bit. I'm having to kind of see where I left things and figure out what was the plan. I think the Asians' plan here is to try to do some buying and selling of resources. I was trying to decide if that's what the Russians were after, but the Russians aren't going to mess with the selling. They'd like to make money. The Japanese, though, they can only sell 2. It's probably not worth the time. I think this guy is going to act as a transport to bring things over to Venus. And the Asians, I guess, are going to engage in a little resource trading. The Russians also have the option to bring resources out here. And the Americans realize that they've made a mistake, so we're going to drop down into the flyby. If the Americans were going to execute this, they should have executed their buy last turn because they're about to be blockaded. We have no movement over here. We've got all these damaged from the Battle of Vesta. And yeah, I think the Americans were giving some consideration to moving back inward, and I'm trying to remember what I was thinking there. Right now, we've got the Russians are coming. Isn't that a movie from like the 60s? So they're going to get to go after some pirates. Got these rover and orbiter and a flyby out here at the scattered disk. Okay, so that looks like all the movement. So next up, the Asians. Let's go ahead and take care of their launches first. So LV-4 launching resources to the asteroid belt. 52. That's good. Rockets recovered and the resources get moved into the base box. Next up, their orbiter on an LV-2 is going to be launched to the sun. 53. So they're going to get that sun observation going again. All right, let's look at their other movements now. So they've got this. What do they want to do with it? The other thing, they can just buy resources at Earth and haul them out here. They've actually got a decent number of resources, though. So I think they've got time to do what we were talking about, which is, I think they're going to go to Earth and buy fuel to sell to the Japanese. How much will the Japanese buy? Looks like 6. And they can also do ore. So they'll buy fuel and ore and go sell those things and make money. Okay, this guy is just coming into orbit. So now the Redstone base is blockaded. This guy is at their Phobos Deimos base, can pick up that ore. Now, where do they want that ore? They don't really need it on Mars. So I think they are going to take it and head to the asteroid belt. I guess they could have also taken it to the moon, but they don't have any transport capacity and they need it over here. Okay, let's see here. This guy is going to head back to the base. And now these guys are going to move. And so we're going to have an interception attempt. The Americans will attempt to intercept. So again, let's see here. Red die will be the Asians. Black will be the Americans. Now, the Americans get to subtract 2. Well, let's figure out what the target die roll number is. It starts off at 4, and then we go +1 for every crewed vehicle over 1. Is that right? I'll double check myself. In either fleet. So it would be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it sounds like we're guaranteeing an interception pretty much. I was just making sure that where you look at every 7 CV value, that's in tactics points. Yeah, it's just every CV after the first in both the searching fleet and the fleet being searched for. So as the Asians are leaving, the Americans try to intercept. And we're looking at 9s for both of them. the Americans get to subtract 2 from their dice because they have 5 or more drones, and the Asians get to subtract 1. We said Asians are red, Americans are black. Hang on, I just dropped the die. Okay, found my die. So the Americans are a 5, and I think we'll be subtracting 2 from that. Asians got an 8 minus 1, so 7. So as far as tactics points go, certainly it's in favor of the Americans. The Americans are going to give the Asians 5 minus, so 3 for the Asians plus some amount for every, what do we have, 16 plus 6 is 22, so maybe like 3. Anyway, there's enough there. So the Americans have the tactics points advantage. And what that means is the Asians say, we will surrender. And so all of these guys are going to get flipped, and they don't get a biology marker for that. And so they're leaving Europa, which they come out here. This is where you actually have to start paying attention to all of these spaces. And the Asians are going to then head on out to the flyby and go to the asteroid belt. Okay. And what was I going to say? The base was blockaded. So the Americans or the Asians could have tried to launch resources on a rocket to the Europa base, but that would have been subject to interception. And as we can see from the numbers, they're pretty good for the Americans. So they probably would have intercepted, so that anything like that would have been a waste of time on the part of the Asians. Let's see here, anything else there? So that takes care of the Asian movement up to there, and in fact that looks like all of the Asians' movements. Next up are the Russians. Let's go ahead and do their launches. So we said an LV-2 launching those 4 resources to Venus. '81, rocket is recovered, and that fuel shows up in Venus. The next thing, flyby in a probe on an LV-4. I think the destination will be Neptune. 52, rocket is recovered. Neptune is a 6-year trip, minus 3. And they'll just go ahead and take the 3. They may go for a slower, they'll drop the probe here. They may take a slower approach to the Kuiper Belt. Thank you for the viewer who reminded me how to pronounce that. Okay, what other Russian movements do we have? So they're gonna try that again. So those guys are gonna stay. The orbiter, though, needs to move to the sun. Observation spot engine check is a 6, which is very low, but not low enough to cause a malfunction. This guy, I guess, is just going into Earth orbit. He'll stack with a base. Doesn't really matter. Well, I mean, technically it does, but so I guess he won't, but I don't see anything happening either way. Other Russian movements, those are Americans. There's no Russians over here. these Russians are going to be fighting shortly. And the question is, yeah, this crewed vehicle is going to go ahead and head on to Saturn in order to mine that asteroid. And I guess that's all of the Russians' movements. Don't see anything else. Okay, Americans, let's take care of their launch. So an LV-2 rover, they're going to send it to the Kuiper Belt. They'd like to send it out to Haumea Make. Oh, and they have one other launch from a base. So here's the rover launch, 70 whatever. So they've got an LV-2 at Jupiter still. And the rover, so that is, so here Jupiter to the Kuiper Belt is 7, so that's a 4-year journey, -1 for an LV-2, so in the 3 box. They're also, so they've got resources and an LV-3 at the, oh, too late. They should have done it again. This is subject to interception now. I don't know that they want to risk it. They'll hold off. I was going to send some of this to the asteroid belt, but that looks, yeah, risky. Okay, so they're not doing that. Do they have anything in the inner system? I do not believe so. So how do they want to resolve this stuff? Do they just go with those guys to Jupiter? I think the answer is yes right now. So these guys are going to head back to Jupiter, and there's nothing to mess with them. So when you're back out to Jupiter, they've got these crewed vehicles, and they are going to come over here to Europa to mine some supplies so that the Americans have the option to go build a base. Okay, now what do the Americans need to do here? Well, they've got a bunch of crewed vehicles. They don't need all of that to blockade Europa. So they can leave one of these guys. Now the question is, if they leave, well, they can see, let's see here, the Americans have, they can see that the Asians are not going to be able to resupply and ready all that, all those vehicles. So the Americans can see that they can only do 2. They do see that they've got the supplies there, but they've got to mess around with, so they've got a year. Just trying to think, what is there anything that the Americans can do with these crewed vehicles? And the answer is not really. There's nothing to explore. They could send somebody. Maybe it makes sense. They'll keep one here, and maybe they send it out to the flyby box. And I guess if you're going to do that, what's the Asians? They don't have any defenses. So, and do the Asians have enough? Or they do have enough ore to go to a large defense network. Maybe we'll switch this up. Send that one there, and this guy is going to go to Saturn just in case the Russians fail to kill a pirate, the Americans will have an opportunity to get one. We've already moved those, so I don't think there's any other American movement. Looks like we're done. Next up is the combat phase. And the only combat we've got actually Russian combat here. We'll take care of that in a minute. Let's go after these pirates. So, give me 1 second. I'm just going to double check myself. Again, I don't believe the pirates join together and create a fleet. I think they operate you can just consider them to be separate fleets, but I'll check. Yeah, I guess the way I read it, and I guess we can read the text together. You may also search for pirates to fight them, but only one pirate is ever included in combat at a time. But only one is ever included in combat at a time. How to interpret that? I mean, it's very clear to me that one CV can only engage one pirate. Well, let's just go ahead and take it as it reads. Presumably the other pirate is hiding out. So the two Russian CVs will search for a pirate, and that makes the Americans' choice. Do the Americans want to do something different? Nah, they'll just stick with the single CV8. Okay, so the Russians, the target number is a 4. The Russians have one extra ship, which makes it a 5. And they also get to subtract 1 from their die roll. So the pirates are going to be black, the Russians are red. Target number is a 5 or less, and the Russians are subtracting 1 because they have a drone. Well, the Russians got super lucky again. So Russians rolled a 1. They get to subtract 1. So they're giving the pirates 0 tactical points, and the Russians have a +1 tactical point tech, so they're getting 10 tactical points. So it's a CV4. So spending their tac points. Well, they've got a fighter drone, so they'll get to subtract 1 damage. And their combat strength, I guess I can give you something more interesting to look at than the thing. So their combat strength there, 4 + 7 is 11. And they're going up against a 3. And I say it's 11, but actually it's 11 plus the Russians have +3 to their combat die roll. Attack roll tech. So they're going to start off at a 14, which is automatically 4 damage inflicted, and that's enough to kill a pirate. So they don't have to do anything other than spend all of their tac points on decreasing damage. So they'll do that, and the fighter adds 1, so that's like -6 damage that the Russians are going to take, and they're going to automatically kill this guy in strike combat. We'll go ahead and roll the numbers, but so the Russians roll, they've got a 14 plus this die roll, which is 6. 20, that's 6 damage to the pirates. The pirates have a strength of 3. Plus 3 is 6. 6 or less is 0 damage. And then it was 6. Russians were canceling 6. So the Russians kill one of these pirates, and they get half of the pirate cash, which is going to be like 5, and then half of that would be 1.5 rounded up. So they get that money. They also get, I think, a victory point. I always forget about the rewards. Half the cash, a politics, and a victory. Yep. So a victory marker and a politics marker. And like I said, when the Asians surrendered, if they had a politics marker, they would have had to have given it to the Americans. Okay, so they've done that one. And then next up for combat, the Russians are going to roll on the non-player faction raid table. Let's see what that is. A 5, so that's better. So resources captured 5, damage sustained on raiding fleet 2. Well, let's take this. So they've already got 4 damage, so they're certainly not going to put 2 damage on the CV6. But they are going to do it 1 and 1. So this guy is going to go up to 5. And we have to roll for both of these now. But they're about to get 5 more resources, and they will take it all as supplies. To feed to Venus. Okay, first up, let's roll recall on the warship. 54, no. And the cargo ship, 69, no. Okay. So they can, it's a good thing for them to hold out. Oh, and a victory point. I'm just moving my victory point markers a little closer because that's working out. Okay, that's all of the combat, right? Nothing over here, nothing out here. Okay, then next up is exploration, starting with the Americans. They don't have anything going on in the inner system. Of course, there's nothing at Jupiter or here. So they've got an orbiter at Neptune. They will target let's see here, they're +3 for robotic. So that's 10, that's an automatic. That would be 9. Physics, engineering. And that's a 9. They're just going to take the physics from Neptune. So automatically succeeds and roll malfunction. 60, no malfunction. Physics marker for Neptune is a 1. Next up for the Americans, that rover, none of those are doing remote, so they've got the flyby. And they will do that. And all of this, both of these are physics, and I think they're effectively the same because that's a +1 for a flyby up at Sedna. So there is 6. I'll just pick Eris. 6 plus 5 is 11, and then minus 5 because they're 5 years out. So back to a 6. success, 85, no malfunction. Physics marker for Eris. Is a 3. So they got a depletion, earns them a political marker. Eris is going from a 5 to a 4. Pull a world card. There's no spectrometer. The world card is M-class asteroid. I bet that actually will apply. Actually, it doesn't. That's low gravity, and that's, of course, M-class is minimal. So that does not apply. And then there's a life check of 5%. Life check, 98. No life. Okay. That looks like all of the Americans' explorations. Next up are the Russians. Let's start off with their orbiter. They have, let's see here, I believe they've got +2. Yeah. They've got the +2 tech, so that's a 3 + 4 is 7. Got the 7, 54, no malfunction. Physics marker is a 1. Next up for the Russians. I've got this flyby. I think they'll be risking it. I was just seeing if they have anything else. Orbiter coming in. So yeah, they'll take the chance with the flyby. So it's a 5. 5, that's 5, that's 5, that's 5. So they've got their choice. I'll go ahead and do Triton right now. So 5 + 5 is 10 - 3. Oh, success, but a 13. So the flyby and the probe are coming off. That was $5 billion down the drain, pretty much. Physics marker for Triton. There's a 2. And they get an engineering marker for the malfunction. Which is a 1. So I don't think I see any other explorations for the Russians, so they're done. And Asians, they don't have anything here. They do have their telescope, and they will target they're going to target the Haumea Make. So that's 5 halved and rounded up to 3. +3 for the telescope, 6. A success with a 4 and a 25 for the malfunction is okay. So they're pulling physics for Haumea Make. And it's a 2. Next up, the Asians have a flyby, which is a 4. 4 plus 5 is 9, minus 5 back down to 4. I think they're going to wait a turn or two, but they've got this orbiter. That's a 5, and they're going to target here at the Kuiper belt. 5, and it's actually plus 2, so that's a 12. And an 8 and a 3%. So, bam, 1 physics marker, and then a malfunction. I got a 1 for the physics, engineering marker for the malfunction. Also a 1. Pretty crappy results. And the orbiter comes off, and that is all of the Asians explorations. Okay, remote mining. I know there is some, but I think it's just the Americans over here, and I don't think anybody else has any. So the Americans doing 2 remote minings here, and that's going to be a 6 plus 3, yeah, 9. So 9 is the target number. So one of them, 37 and 2, minus 1, so that's going to be 3 supplies. Second one, 85 and 9, minus 1, 2 supplies. So they're getting 5 supplies. And they can just, again, that, they can load it all on one guy right now. There's no other remote mining going on right now. So that looks like the end of that. Next up is the trade and base construction. Well, let's look at our trades. Russians are not doing that yet. They're going to wait till later in the decade. Those are not happening. Americans cannot. They're blockaded. Russians are not selling fuel in Vostok, and the Asians could buy supplies, but they're not going to worry about that right now either. Over here, they're not going to sell ore. Russians are not going to sell supplies. Nope. And let's see here, the Americans already did that. This is blockaded, so that's not available. The Russians can buy fuel if they want. Do they want? What base is that? Teslina. They've got plenty of stuff here. We're probably being inefficient with the Russians here. They probably should have built a launch vehicle and launched their stuff from out here. Maybe they'll do that next turn. So how much fuel do they have? They've got 5 fuel. So they're going to just hold off. And the Americans are not going to sell ore at Independence, and so I think all the trades are done. Base construction. We're going to just do this left to right. Spirit base, nothing obviously. Freedom base. So this is the asteroid belt. They are going to upgrade to a large defense network. So that costs 6 ore. This is blockaded, so there's nothing they want to build with probably can build with just fuel and supplies. Prosperity base. I think the answer is no. So they're done. Russia. I think the only thing the Russians really want to do is do two supplies and a fuel, and move up to 3 settlements. At Mars. I'm sorry, Venus. And I was just double checking. Yeah, everybody's got the terraforming tech. Venus. They're going to worry right now about getting the settlements up a little more before they start terraforming. And they're pretty much just counting on only getting halfway there, but they may get lucky. Okay, so that's all the Russians stuff, I think. Asians. What base is this? This is Ekta. That is the Jupiter base, right? Yeah, 1 settlement. It does not have any defense networks right now, but I think they will go ahead and start building that. So, defense. Small one is going to cost 3 ore. So that way they can at least force the Americans to, like, that CV6 can blockade. Interestingly, this CV8 cannot blockade a large defense network by itself, even though it has lots of drones. But the Polaris with the 7, as long as they have the same combat strength or higher, then they can blockade. So that's it for the Asians, except, and now this doesn't count against their 1 facility limit. And in fact, I guess they were planning on doing this, yeah. So they're going to upgrade Mars to a large, and they're only going to, you can spend, they're going to go 1 step on, so that's 4, costs 4 supply to do 1 terraforming step. They can do more than 1 step per turn, and they can do it in addition to the facility build, but each additional step costs 1 additional supply point. So the Mars is beginning to get terraformed. And that is the turn. Well, I know the video is kind of long. Maybe we'll go a little faster in this next one. So give me a minute to figure out the builds and be right back. Okay, and here are the builds for the year 2132. Okay, so the builds, let's see here, what are the Asians doing? They're spending that, they've got the ship here, 3 damage, gets repaired by 3 ore, and that readies it. So this guy is ready to go again. And they're spending 12 billion on Earth to load onto their CV6. Which they intend to go sell at the moon. And they're spending $4 billion on Earth to replace the orbiter that they just lost last turn. Russians spending $2 billion on Earth for a telescope. They're spending $12 billion on Earth for these resources, which they're going to load on the Gagarin, and take that to Venus. And they're spending these resources at Jupiter or Europa. So an LV-2 flyby and a probe. We'll try that again. The Americans spending this at the Jupiter base, building an orbiter. The Americans, they've got a lot of cash, and they did actually consider, after seeing the Asians do all those resources, the Americans thought about just paying cash for a crewed combat vehicle and trying to interfere with this. But just seeing how that would play out, ended up feeling a bit like a waste of time. Let's talk it through real quick. So normally the Asians are going to move first. Well, they're going to move to a base over here, and they're going to be safe at the base. And so they're going to be able to execute one of the trades, and the Americans could come out and kind of keep them from moving to the other base. Alternatively, the Americans, because they are the initiative player, they could choose to move first, and they could go sit at the moon orbit or here and interfere, but I think the moon orbit is the place you want to block that guy off at. And in that case, the Asian just sits there and is safe. It prevents them from getting over there to sell, but I'm not sure that it's worth $14 billion, in which case, and then the other thing is, then the Asians can send their crewed vehicle over here and try to interfere with that, or maybe they do that plus build another combat vehicle. It feels like a bit of a sideshow. So although the Americans would really like to interfere with the Asians and prevent them from earning $12 billion, I'm not sure that there's a lot that they can do about it. So that's all of our builds. So on to not trade. How about movement first? Starting with transfer boxes. That was the T word I was looking for. So all of this stuff comes in, sliding around. Over here at Jupiter, these guys arrive. At Saturn, more stuff arrives. Flyby, 1 box, 2 box, and the 4 box. I think that's all of those movements. So on to the Asians. Let's go ahead and do the orbiter that they just built at Earth. I know it's a little bit of a glare there. Launching on an LV-4 and sending it to the Kuiper Belt. It's a 6-year journey minus 3 years effective. Oh my gosh, they rolled a 2. That is a total loss. 3% is still the number for robotic explorers. So the orbiter and the LV-4 are destroyed, and the Asians get an engineering marker. And which is just a 1. That's pretty damned insulting. That's a lot of money down the drains, or drain, singular. Asian orbiter moving. 29. Gets to the sun. Maybe I'll do it that way. Okay. Other Asian movement. This crewed vehicle will come over here to the Chinese. go ahead and take the cell marker off. CV7 I think is going to sit there for another turn. I'm not sure exactly how this is going to play out. I mean, the Americans have kind of dispersed. They've sent somebody to Saturn. They'll head back the next turn. Are the Americans going to try to mass and attack the asteroid belt? Are the Asians going to come back to Jupiter? Because the Asians will be adding this CV5 into the mix. I'm not sure. Anyway, all these guys, I say all of these guys, I think it's going to be everybody but, well, okay. First of all, let's move that one out there so it blockades the Freedom Base again. That CV4 is going to go drop the ore off. Again, so that's Tara Base. We've got a bunch of reserved vehicles. Well, the combat ones definitely need to go to the base. And one of these guys needs to go over to T and pick up supplies. And either one of them could do it. Go ahead and use the bigger one. And that one will go there. So now the Americans did, I thought about sending resources, launching resources out to the Freedom Base, but again, it would have required them to take the initiative and move first before this situation happened, because now it's blockaded again, but they could have launched a rocket and put more resources at the Freedom Base. But I didn't see the point, really. Other Asian movement, I'm pretty sure that is it. Okay, next up the Russians. So this crude vehicle is leaving Earth and headed to Venus. And I'm just going to slide these things over here and we'll remember to add them to the base next turn when the ship arrives. Got a telescope. Let's launch it on an LV2. 25, the rocket is not recovered. The telescope goes up to Earth orbit. I've got LV2 launching a flyby probe from Jupiter to Neptune. That's a distance of 6, which will be halved to 3 years, and then 1 subtracted. 36, rocket is recovered, and the flyby and the probe go in the 2 box. What else for the Russians? Well, they've got this stuff. This guy's going to head to Venus as well, taking those things. This guy's heading back to Earth to get repaired. I'm just looking at the Russians' money situation. Do they have a good way to make some money? They can sell fuel at the Vostok base, and the Vostok is this one. It's got 9 settlements, so they could sell 8 ore, so they could make a profit of 8. Or 8's fuel. Okay, so they can make $8 there. I should have done a little bit better job there. And so we actually are going to change this up. So the 12 billion that they just spent, we're going to give them 4 back. We're going to wipe all that away. And instead, we're going to give them 8 fuel. On the Gagarin. And send it to Mars. It's going to slow them down a little bit, but that's what they need to do. Because they're going to have to spend 5 billion to get the for virtual ore at Earth to repair that damage, and they'd rather go get back attacking Mercury. Okay, so that was a little change up there. Oh, and they need $4 billion back. And they'll be able to buy all that resources. They can just come back to Earth in a minute or a couple years and do what they were just about to do and take stuff to Venus. Okay, other Russian movements. So taking care of that stuff. These guys are sitting here. I think that's all of the Russians' movements. Yes. Okay, next up, the Americans. So the Americans are launching an orbiter from Jupiter. They're going to send it to the Kuiper Belt. A 3%. Another failure, total failure. Launch vehicle and orbiter are destroyed, and the Americans get an engineering marker. Americans got a 3, better than a 1, still. Okay, so that's that launch. Sure, there's nothing else in here for the Americans. So they've got all this stuff. Well, let's see here. These guys need to return to base. That ore goes to the American base. That 4 ore is just going to end up being used to help repair that damage. The Constitution will stay there. These guys will spend one more turn doing supplies, I think. And that guy's staying in the flyby box, so that looks like all of the movements. Not a lot. Combat phase. Well, the Americans get to go first. So the Americans are going to look for the pirate first. Target number is a 4. The Americans get to subtract 1 from their die roll because they have 1 drone. They don't have 5 drones to get a -2. So the pirate is black and the Americans are red. Well, the pirates have the advantage there. So the pirates got a 10. The Americans... No, that's opposite. Terrible for the pirates. Once again. Sorry. The Americans have a 1 and they get to subtract. We're going for low numbers here. Oh, and you can't even see the numbers. Sorry, there they are. 10 and 1. So the Americans subtract 1, give the pirates 0 tactical points. The pirates give the Americans 10 tactical points. The Americans also have a tech for plus 2 tactics points. They have 12. And so the Americans, just looking, let's look at these numbers. So the Americans are sitting here on a 5 on the combat table, or plus 3, which brings them to 8. And they have, what do we say, like 12 tactics points. So they're starting off as an 8. They'll roll plus 1, so they're guaranteed to do 2 damage. So they'll spend 4 tactics points to make sure they do 4 damage. And the remaining 8 tactics points, well, they've got fighters and bombers too, so they can use, yeah. Every drone is effectively 2 tactics points when it comes to adding or subtracting damage. I guess technically, let's see here, that's a CV8, so there is plus, and I probably screwed this up for the Russians. So yeah. The pirates would have had 1 more this is where the 7, plus 1 per full 7 of enemy CV size. So the pirates get 1, so it's down to 11 tactics points. Anyway, it's, I'm not going to roll a bunch of dice here. It's going to be an automatic defeat. Well, let's roll the pirates, but we already know that Americans can avoid like 4. So they use 4 tactics points and they're guaranteed to kill it. That leaves them 11 minus 4, 7, so 6 that they can apply to combat damage reduction. So that's minus 3 damage and then minus 4 more for the fighter drones. So minus 7 damage. Pirates roll a 3 plus 10, 13 is 4 damage. 7 of it is, or it's reduced by 7, so negative 3 damage. Done. And the Americans roll a 7 plus their 3 for tech plus 5, so 15, and that's 4 damage. And the pirate is destroyed, and they had 2 more damage. So yeah, 6 damage inflicted on the pirate. Pirate is destroyed. Americans earn a political marker and a victory point, and they get half of this $6. So they're going to get 3 and leave 3. The other reason why the Americans kind of want to hold on to cash, they are they're over their base limit, they're over their CV limit, so they're going to be burning through cash at a little higher rate, or their income is going to be lower. And let's see here, that's the pirate, that's combat. That's all we had for combat. So we move on to explorations, starting with the Americans. They've got nothing in the inner system. And so they have the Shoemaker Orbiter, which is a 5 plus 5 automatic at Neptune. $60, no malfunction, physics marker is 1. You see the 60. Okay, that's the orbiter. And then they've got the flyby. They don't have a lot of exploration going on right now. The orbiter, or the flyby, is a 6. This time it makes more sense to target Sedna. So that's a 5 plus 6 is 11 minus 5 puts it back to a 6. They got a 47 and a 4, so a success. Again, physics. And it's a 2. I'm not seeing any other American explorations. So next up are the Russians. Let's start off with their orbiter at the sun. It's a 7. 80 and a 2. Physics for the Russians is a 2. The Russians have a telescope now at Earth. Got an orbiter coming in. They're also going to target Haumea Make. No, they'll go for deep space astronomy. Nah. Okay, sorry, I'm being wishy-washy here. Haumea Make. So that's 3 plus their 3 is a 6. 40 and a 7, so nothing happens. Other explorations, well, is this flyby going to go again? Yes. And it's going to target Triton. That's a 5 plus 5 is 10 minus 2 is 8. Oh my gosh. Look at that, 3%. And a 10. So no success, another malfunction, just an engineering marker. It's a 3, so, but still. Terrible luck there. I've removed that. The orbiter's not arrived yet, and that is all of the Russians' explorations. We'll need to remember they are going to be doing a remote mining. Asian exploration, orbiter at the sun, 7. That's a success. And we're looking at 1. Physics. Telescope going for Haumea Make. Out there, right there. 3 plus 3 is 6. (28 and 4). So a success. Physics marker. Pull. For Haumea Make is a 1. No depletion. Okay, what's up next for the Asians? They've got a flyby. What do those numbers look like? 4 plus 5 or 5 or 5. So 9 minus 4. 50%. They'll wait another turn. Nah, they're going to go for it. And they're going to go for, they're going to actually go for here, get the engineering. Yeah, they need some engineering points. Galatea, Larissa, Proteus. So we said that's a 50%, right? Yeah, 9 minus 4. And they did it, no malfunction. Engineering. Is a 2. Nothing here, nothing there. Okay. Remote mining. So that's all the explorations, remote mining. So we've got the Americans here and the Russian with the asteroid. Let's go ahead and do the Russians with the asteroid, even though we're out of order. So let's not go out of order. Let's be correct with our sequence of play. 2 American attempts at a 9 for supplies. First one, 73 and a 4. 4 minus 1 is 3, so that's 2 supplies. No recall. Next one, 44 and a 2 minus 1, so another 5 supplies total and no recalls. And again, I'm not worrying about, although I think now one of them is totally, if they're all on 1, then it's full. Okay, Russians doing an asteroid. So let's roll. 42, no recall. 10. 10 on the asteroid harvest table is 6 ore. And they also earn a victory point for that. So come over here. This guy has a cargo capacity of 8. He's got 6 ore now. Took care of the asteroid. That is all of our exploration phase. Next up, trade and base construction. I do not think that any of the things we said about trade are changing right now. So that's not true. This one. So the Asians can sell to the other Asians, the Chinese Asians. 6 ore, which gets them $12 billion. And move that. Yeah, those things are not happening, not happening, not happening. Okay, that's all the trade. Base construction. Anything different now? And I'm sure there's a little bit, but the Americans aren't doing any base construction. The Russians, I think. Okay, so the Russians are sitting over here on 11 ore at the asteroid belt that they're not doing anything with. We could send them, we could launch 1 fuel out there and they could build an LV-1 and start sending that somewhere. Maybe that makes sense. Because if they just had 1, okay, so out here at Jupiter, they're not going to build anything, but, oh, and they don't have the supplies this turn to build the settlement, but they will next turn, so they're not building anything here this turn. Asians, well, I think they are going to double check. So yeah, the Americans have a large defense network at the Freedom Base. They still only have a small one at Jupiter, but they don't want to spend the ore. The Asians, though, they are going to go ahead and spend the ore here. So They've got 7, they're going to spend 6. To make themselves a little more of a tough nut to crack. They've got a large here, they've got a large one hiding in here somewhere. And they've got a large defense network here, I imagine. Yep. Okay. So at their main bases, they've got, well, that's not a main base, but it's an important base. Which also reminds me, I was just curious because the rules, they don't mention it, so I assume it's not the case. If the Asians wanted to send a crewed vehicle out here into the outer system, they're relying on the supply or the spaceport that's at Europa, but Europa is blockaded. Being blockaded, there's no mention in the rules that being blockaded negates the effects of the supply station or spaceport in providing range. So that would seem to be kind of problematic or a pain in the butt to track. So I like that. But it was a consideration or a question I had about the rules. And the rules are silent on it, but just being silent on it doesn't mean that it's a question. I think it's fine the way it is. Okay, so back to base building. We're not doing any here or here. These resources are about to get loaded onto transport, and so all the Asians are going to do is spend 4 supply points and do another terraforming point at Mars. They can do one more, and then they're going to need an infusion of supplies, which they're not going to get because that's at the asteroid belt. But this guy's making money, then he can buy supplies on Earth and bring it out to him. So they've got a plan. That looks like the turn, and we're at 1 hour and 20 minutes, so that looks like a good place to stop. You can see the situation here, combat. Americans are going to get their damage repaired. They're going to bring the CV-8 back, and both sides will assess their situation. They may just have a stalemate, or somebody may make a push during this decade, or they may wait for, the question, of course, right now, I imagine the Asians will want to try to end the war, and the Americans would like to escalate it. Okay. I think that is the turn and the video. Thanks for watching.